Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this special edition of On the Road with JJ. I am your host, John the Body Johnson, and I said this was a special edition. This is something that's been in the works, something that's been coming, and here it is. I'm going to deliver. This is my answer to the Ultimate. Now, if you've been following us here on the ECS network, you know that my former broadcast partner, I should say, Greg Hunter, hosted an Ultimate to pick out who was the greatest NWA/WCW champion of what's best defined as the Crockett WCW era, where you have from 1981 to 2001, so a 20-year period there, of who was the greatest champion there. And that panel of Don Matthews, Shadow Jackson, and Philip Payne, I thought they did a phenomenal job at who they were picking for their through their brackets. Some of their picks I agree with, some of their picks not so much. I think that everybody approached it in a great manner, a positive manner. It was unique, so to speak. You know, it was definitely something a little different. I like the fact that Philip Payne was looking at finishes and looking at this as these were just one-off matches, and just looking at it from that that point of view, and then just everybody else's different points there. When Greg Hunter and I first talked about doing the Ultimate, one of the things that we had talked about was not only was this, these guys are in a vacuum, and it's these guys at the time they were champion. One of the things that I had mentioned was what was the significance of their reign? What was did one guy's reign mean more than another? And not just in the place of length of the reign or dominance as champion, because those are all things that are really controlled in a booking environment. I was looking at this from a historically significant standpoint, which I guess you could also say that's controlled in a booking environment, but what was the lasting impact of that person? And I have my brackets right here. I'm not going to be reading and driving. I'm going to be skimming more or less than anything, but I know that they broke theirs up into several episodes. I'm going to try to do this in one 20 to 30 minute episode. It may run a little bit longer than On the Road usually runs. Hopefully you guys will stay in tune, stay with what we're doing here, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. I don't have anybody to argue with, nobody riding shotgun with me, so this is just really my thoughts in the car. So we start off with Ric Flair and David Arquette. Now, when Hunter first presented this match to me, and he presented these brackets, my brain automatically went over to David Arquette, because while you can't point to that one moment to say that was really the beginning of the end for WCW, it definitely was a moment that stood out. But when I started thinking at this from a booking standpoint, I was like, why not put Arquette over? David Arquette could be your Andy Kaufman style character. He gets a screw job win over Flair, goes into the second round, and depending on who you have in the second round in that next match, Flair comes out, tries to screw Arquette, ends up screwing that guy. So now you have Arquette moving on in the tournament. You have Flair going into another program. You have Arquette go as far as he can go, and then eventually it works back around to Flair and Arquette. But that's if we were, doing something long-term, doing something booking-wise. But it's not what we're doing. We're talking about who is the greatest NWA/WCW World Champion. Arquette, to his credit, definitely wouldn't even want to be considered in that breath. From what I've heard about Arquette, was very humble. Don't think he was really so much embarrassed to be the WCW champion, but it's definitely not something that I guess he went into demanding or wanting. I think it was something that was put on him. just to promote a movie, which I think is probably the shittiest reason to ever put a championship on somebody, just to promote a movie. I think Arquette, I believe I read a story, and like I said, I can fact check this, you know, but I'm going to put it out there right now. I believe one of the things I heard about David Arquette is the money he made in WCW, he actually donated to the families of Owen Hart and Louis McCauley, because those were two guys that, you know, died around that time. Of course, Owen tragically in the ring, and Louis McCauley of a drug overdose, but that was, you know, a stand-up move. It's not enough to win the sympathy vote, I guess. And I mean, I know that probably sounds callous, but we're talking about the greatest champion here, and Ric Flair does make it out of the first round, beating David Arquette, which brought us to our second match, which was Harley Race and Jeff Jarrett. One of the quotes from the panel during the Ultimate, and it was something that really resonated with me, that I really thought was something that was spot on, is Jeff Jarrett is one of the most over guys, but is also one of the most overrated, excuse me, guys, but is also at the same time one of the most underrated guys. I think a lot of that has to do with the way Jeff's been booked, and the way that he's booked himself throughout his career, you know, when he's had control of that. Jeff is an extremely talented worker. He is a guy that, you know, despite being the champion in WCW during the time frame that he was, thought he did a good job carrying the belt. But when you put that up against what Harley Race had done up to this point, and it's actually something that I'll get to in my second round matchups, Harley Race, I feel, was the better champion than Jeff Jarrett. Harley Race was just a man's man. Harley Race was, you know, you looked at him and you thought champion. He was a tough guy. He was, you know, he flaunted the money when he had to, but, you know, he wasn't a Flair where it was, you know, limousines and, you know, jet planes and things like that. But when it came to like a bounty and, you know, of course we saw during that run with Flair, I mean, that was Race, and the, you know, the jewelry and things with Race. So Harley Race goes over on Jeff Jarrett. Now we go into our next matchup, which is Sid Vicious versus Scott Steiner. Now, originally when I sat down and I did my brackets with Greg Hunter, and I jokingly said that I wouldn't want to put either man over. You know, and it's really doesn't have much to do with personal feelings or just anything like that, because I really don't know the guys personally. I know that Sid, you know, was kind of on again, off again, kind of, you know, flaky, I guess is the best way to put it. Definitely wasn't the greatest promo, but Sid was very, you know, imposing. And if Sid could be a quiet monster and have a mouthpiece and just be the guy that beats the dog out of everybody, then I think you have, you know, a better shot at getting Sid over. And then Scott Steiner prior to his second WCW run, Scott Steiner from '89 up until they go to the WWF, Scott was extremely talented. Scott wasn't much of a promo guy, but Scott had the in-ring ability, and him and his brother Rick, man, were probably, you know, we were doing greatest tag teams. I think Scott and Rick make it up, you know, definitely, if not the finals, the semifinals. It, you know, just really depends on who you have in there. But you put these two guys in the ring together. We're talking about Scott Steiner's run as WCW World Champion. This was Big Papa Pump. This is when he was pumped up, you know, beyond recognition. This was the big bad booty daddy. This was the Steiner that could barely move at one point. You know, and I know that the guys had talked about it being a shoot. If this was a shoot match, Scott Steiner would win all day long. And I had to beg to differ, because if this was a shoot, Sid would grab the scissors and go to town on Scott. But, you know, that's just my feelings. But in all seriousness, though, if I'm going to look, I think I'm going to take Sid. Sid would go over in this one. I'm going to change my mind up a little bit and put Sid over on Scott Steiner, move him on to our second round, which then brings us up to Diamond Dallas Page and Booker T. Booker T, who closed out WCW, winning the world title, was a guy that, you know, primarily you thought of him as a tag team wrestler, and really busted his ass, got to the United States title, then gets to the world title. I thought he was a guy that, you know, really worked hard, and it really, you know, it was a moment that I think was maybe 3 years too late for Booker T. Because at that point, when he wins the belt, I think everybody in WCW, everybody was so apathetic towards WCW that nobody really cared. But one guy that he's going up against, Diamond Dallas Page, DDP, his story to me is so much more than what this match is. DDP was a guy who started off as a manager. He did some announcing, and then at 35 decides, hey, I want to be a wrestler. And he gets in, and he worked harder than, you know, just about anybody there. You know, and he had to, because he was already, you know, at that age. I mean, he was already at an age where some guys had been in the business for 20 years. He's, you know, at an age where some guys have been in the business for maybe, you know, 15 at the least. So, you know, he's coming in 35. He's coming into, you know, where he's hitting middle age. So he had to work that much harder, you know. And then when he does go over for the belt, you know, it's such a huge night. You've got, you know, so many legends in the ring that he was there with. To me, that makes it a little bit more important than what Booker T did. So I've got DDP going over in the going to the second round. Next is Sting and Vince Russo. Sting goes over. It's the WCW franchise. Now I know if we were booking this, or let me rephrase that, if Vince Russo was booking this, Vince Russo would find a way to beat Sting, and it would be some kind of horse fuckery going on. But you know, and that's not to shit on Vince. I know that there's a lot of people in and out of the business that want to shit on Vince Russo because of his heat with Cornette, and a lot of people that shit on Cornette because of his heat with Vince Russo. Look, here's the thing. We're going to call it like we call it. Jim Cornette is one of the greatest managers in wrestling history. I put him just behind Bobby the Brain Heenan. Jim Cornette is one of the greatest minds in the wrestling business. I definitely put him up there with guys like Vince McMahon, Paul Heyman, Eddie Graham. I mean, Jim Cornette is the fucking man. Jim Cornette is an asset to anything. Vince Russo has his place. Vince Russo is good in doses. I'm not going to take away from what the man did. The man was able to put out some great ideas. But, you know, it's also like Bobby Heenan said, you know, Vince Russo may have come out with 100 ideas, and Vince McMahon may have used 10 of them, and then would turn around and make them his own. He would add things to them. So it is what it is. I mean, it's definitely a thing. But, you know, Vince Russo as champion did nothing for the company. It was once again a thing that you could point to where the company started going down the shitter. So Sting goes over there. Barry Windham and Randy Savage. Barry Windham falls into that same category that Booker T did. Barry Windham was so extremely talented. Barry had, you know, worked so hard. And, you know, Barry gets into a point where he's going to be positioned for the world title. And then everything goes down with Flair. And it kind of, you know, shits on that. So then eventually they put the belt on Barry Windham. But by this point, I think it was way too late. It's not to say that Barry wasn't still talented. It was just so late in his career, and so to the point of, like, I really think the people who were behind Barry in like 86, 87, just lost interest, and it just didn't mean as much, because he didn't beat Flair like he had been chasing Flair all those years. It just didn't happen. It didn't happen that way. And but you had Randy Savage. Randy Savage coming in, winning the belt. I think it had a little bit, more oomph to it. His program with Flair involving his dad and things like that, and that's where I'm going to go with Savage, and having Savage go over on Barry Windham. Ron Garvin and Kevin Nash. This is another one of these ones that was really hard for me to decide on. But the thing is, Ron Garvin wins the belt in September. I think he maybe defended it literally a handful of times. And then he drops it back to Flair at Starrcade in November. So, we're talking just over 2 months as champion. So, there wasn't really much to judge Garvin on there. Kevin Nash, the same way. Kevin Nash had a couple runs with the belt. But his was, even though tainted booking and a tainted finish, so you look at it from both sides, defeats Goldberg, ends the win streak of Goldberg, wins the belt. I think you give the Duke to Kevin Nash there, and Kevin Nash goes on. Chris Jericho and Rick Rude. This was another one. This is one that I actually had changed my mind on. I've always been a big Rude mark. I always thought that Rick Rude was so talented. Never knew why he wasn't given a good run with given a run with the WWE title, WWF title, when he was there. I think Rick Rude would have been a very believable WWF World Heavyweight Champion. I think he would have been a believable WCW World Champion, given a little bit more of a run with it. But Chris Jericho doesn't win the title in WCW when it was the Turner-owned WCW. Instead, he becomes the first ever undisputed World Heavyweight Champion when he wins both the WCW and WWF World Heavyweight titles. Kind of hard to argue with that. Chris Jericho takes the win over Rick Rude. When we move over to the other side of our bracket, we've got Hulk Hogan and Hiroshi Hase. Hase, not a household name in America, very much different in Japan, but Hulk Hogan is a household name around the world. Hogan coming in and winning the WCW World title in his very first match in WCW, and then winning the WCW title as Hollywood Hogan. It just meant a lot, and I think that Hogan during this time frame definitely means more than Hase. We move on to our next match, which is Ron Simmons and Bret Hart. This is where I know a lot of people would go in this match and say that Bret Hart could out-wrestle Ron Simmons, and this is true. But we're also talking about post-WWF Bret Hart, who any momentum he had leaving WWF after the Montreal Screwjob, any momentum he had was killed almost immediately, and he never was able to gain it back. 1992 for Ron Simmons, he walks into the Baltimore Arena and defeats Vader. Vader, who was a dominant champion at the time, and Vader, who was one of the baddest men in wrestling during this time. He goes in, he defeats him, becomes the first ever African-American World Heavyweight Champion for a major promotion. And that, to me, opens the door for so many more minorities to get the World Heavyweight title. So historically, Ron Simmons would beat Bret Hart in this one. Ricky Steamboat and the Giant. The Giant, the Big Show, Paul White, whatever you want to call him, hadn't quite hit his stride. He was being billed as the son of Andre in WCW for a little while. There was so much going on there with him. But even though he had an amazing rookie year, we're talking about Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, who was NWA World Champion in 1989 and had that unforgettable series of matches with Ric Flair, the best 3-match series I think that's ever existed in the history of wrestling. And so Ricky Steamboat definitely gets the win over the Big Show, the Giant. We'll refer to him as the Giant here because it's WCW. Kerry Von Erich and Lex Luger is next up. Two guys who, million-dollar bodies, at points, was destined for greatness, but just didn't have the mindset to keep the greatness going. So these two guys go in. Kerry Von Erich defeats Ric Flair at the David Von Erich Memorial Tournament of Champions. It was a feel-good moment. No doubt that this was the NWA saying thank you to the Von Erich family, because no doubt that was supposed to be David's spot. But, of course, David Von Erich passes in 1983, never gets to this moment. Kerry gets the moment, holds the title for less than 2 weeks, drops it back in Japan. Lex Luger, who was supposed to get the win over Flair, but of course Flair leaves the WCW because of Jim Herd, goes to WWF, so it's Luger and Windham. And Luger gets the win there, has a short little run with the championship, drops it to Sting in February before he himself decides to head up for the greener pastures of the WWF, although he was at the WBF first. I think significantly, Luger gets the edge in there, just because he had it a little bit longer, and then when he came back, he had another run and was able to do a little bit more, not much, but just edging out Von Erich there. Kurt Angle and Big Van Vader. I'm a huge fan of both of these men's work. I think Kurt Angle is, amazing. Kurt Angle holds the WCW version, the WWF version of the WCW title. Vader winning the title in WCW. Now, to me, I know what I mentioned about Jericho, but to me, it means a little bit more to hold that championship when it's in the promotion that it was intended to be. So I'm giving the Duke there to Vader. Vader's dominance as champion was amazing. Kurt was just holding a belt that, for a company that, for all intents and purposes, was dead. So Vader gets the Duke over Angle there. The next match is two Japanese greats, Masahiro Chono and the Great Muta. This one I didn't really book on the historic significance or the importance of their championship, just on two guys, but I think that, as far as becoming a name in North America, I think Muta did that better than Chono did. So I give Muta the Duke there. Tatsumi Fujinami and The Rock. Tatsumi Fujinami is NWA World Champion by default, by technicality, because they did recognize the title switch there in America, although WCW did not. So Fujinami comes to the United States, drops the belt back to Flair, and all is said and done. I don't think it really did nothing of any importance. In fact, 2 months later, Flair would be gone. So I don't think it was as important, as significant. I don't think the story was told very well here in the States. It was what it was. The Rock becomes champion in the WWF, wins the WCW title there. I don't think you'd be hard-pressed to find as great of an entertainer as The Rock. His in-ring skills, people have called into question, but he knew how to tell a story. He knew how to get things done. I put The Rock over on Fujinami going into the second round. And then to close out our first round, it's the American Dream Dusty Rhodes taking on Goldberg. I know that there are people who were putting Goldberg over in this situation because of how awesome the undefeated streak was. He became the first undefeated World Heavyweight Champion. And that was pretty cool. It was an awesome moment for Goldberg. In the time frame we're talking about, I believe Dusty had 2 more runs with the belt. They were both very short-lived. But it just always seemed that Dusty was around that world title. Even if he wasn't champion, he was around that world title, and it meant a lot. Dusty over Goldberg, I think that if I was going to book this in a match, you have no other choice but to put the American Dream over. Dusty was so amazing in that ring. So I'm going against the grain. I put Dusty over on Goldberg, which moves us to our second round. My first match of the second round is Ric Flair and Harley Race. Of course, this is a match that we had seen numerous times. Always classics. Always, amazing matches from two guys that are just, considered, all-time greats. And I know in a previous episode I talked about throwing the word greats around, but, these are guys that you can do that with, because these guys right here paved the way. They paid their dues. They busted their ass. They were real world champions. They traveled the world defending that title against everybody. And originally in my brackets, I had put Ric Flair over on Harley Race. Because, to me, it's like, it is hard to argue against Ric Flair being the greatest world heavyweight champion, as I burp up my lunch, excuse me. It's hard pressed to say that Ric Flair was not one of the greatest world champions ever, if not the greatest. But the more I got to thinking about this match, here's where, I go the historic significance. There's guys on this list that Ric Flair made. There's guys on this list that Ric Flair had matches with that were considered some of the greatest matches ever. But there's also this moment of, would that have happened without Harley Race? How important is Harley Race into the history of the Nature Boy Ric Flair? So I got to thinking, I'm like, if we don't go through the whole build to Starrcade, if Race isn't going to be the one to drop the belt to Flair at Starrcade, we don't have that build. We don't have that same, take the money. Somebody take the money. We don't have that build up. We don't have that amazing Starrcade steel cage match that built Starrcade. That made it, a must-see event. I don't think that Flair has quite the same impact if it's anybody else in that spot other than Race. So I think just from that standpoint, I actually put Race over on Ric Flair. Next was Vicious and DDP. I'm not going to rehash everything I said about DDP. I think that based on that alone, DDP goes over on Vicious. We go to Sting and Savage. As great as Savage was in WWF, he was good in WCW, but he was never the franchise. That was left up to his opponent, Sting. Sting was the franchise player. Sting was the guy that was he never left. From 1987 up until the day they closed in 2001, 14 years, Sting stayed in WCW, never went to the WWF, never went anywhere else. So, on that alone, Sting goes over on Savage. We have Nash and Jericho. So, I hate to say this because Jericho is such a talented guy. So is Nash. This is kind of like a throwaway toss-up match. I really just kind of looked at both guys' reigns of, but, Jericho gets the edge because Jericho was the first undisputed World Heavyweight Champion, and that included the WCW title. So I put Jericho over on Nash. Moving over to our other second round matches, Hulk Hogan and Ron Simmons. Again, not to rehash what I said about Simmons, but from a historically significant standpoint, I put Ron Simmons over on Hulk Hogan because, once again, he was the first African American champion. It's going to be really hard to top that. Steamboat and Luger, not even close on this one. Luger was always around the belt. Steamboat won the belt in one of the greatest matches ever and dropped the belt in one of the greatest matches ever. So Steamboat gets the edge there. We've got Vader and Muta, which would have been very exciting to see on a pay-per-view for the world title. I think that it would have been with the proper build, we could have seen a really, really good world title match there. But Vader's just so dominant. I got Vader going over in that match. And then our last second round match is The Rock and Dusty Rhodes. I mean, what can you say? I would have paid to see this match just based off the promos alone. The Rock and Dusty. I mean, even when The Rock borrowed Dusty's promo, the Hard Times promo at the Royal Rumble a few years back. I mean, just it's a dream match that the in-ring work wouldn't have had to have mattered. It would have just been the mic work that would have got people into the building and kept people excited. And but you can't argue with Dusty's track record as the World Heavyweight Champion. Dusty goes over on The Rock. Quarterfinals, I have Race and DDP. Now, granted, all the things I said about Harley Race here earlier, they got the popo over there. Anyway, what I said about Race earlier, I go back to DDP's work ethic. I go back to how much harder DDP had to work for that championship, and that's not to take away from Harley Race. But I've got DDP going to the semifinals over Harley Race. Sting and Jericho, once again, what I thought would be a very exciting matchup for the fans. But again, can't argue with Sting's success, can't argue with Sting's longevity. I got Sting going over on Jericho to go to the semis. We go over to the next bracket. We got our next quarterfinal match is Ron Simmons and Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. Again, another exciting matchup. To be honest with you, this would have been a lot of fun because it's that sure power of Ron Simmons against the finesse of Ricky Steamboat. But once again, hitting the historic significance. Yes, Steamboat had some of the greatest series of matches with Ric Flair. Once again, Ron Simmons was the first ever African American World Heavyweight Champion. So, I mean, just from a significant standpoint, that means a lot. And he paved the way for a lot of people. So, we're going to go ahead and we're going to put Simmons over on Steamboat there. And then we go to Vader and Rhodes in the last quarterfinal matchup. This is another one of those ones where it would be the dream match. It would be Dusty being the underdog in this, even though, he had the experience over Vader. He had a lot going over on Vader. But at the same time, Vader was the monster. And I think this would be the monster that Dusty couldn't slay. And so Vader would go over in this one. And also Vader's dominance as champion meant a little bit more than Dusty's feel-good side as champion. The couple times he won it in our grading period. So now we go to semis. We've got DDP and Sting in bracket 1. I think this is where DDP's work ethic would meet the longevity of Sting. I mean, DDP was also a guy that, let's face it, he never left either. DDP was there. I believe DDP first got there in 90 and was there till they closed too. So, I mean, he was only there 3 years shorter than Sting. But at the same time, Sting was the franchise player. Sting's title wins, his win over Flair after coming back from the major knee surgery, was a huge wrestling story at the time. His win over Hogan was a huge wrestling story at the time, because he was the one that came in and slayed the NWO after, he had been forced into the Crow style gimmick that he came into. So at that point, I think you got to put Sting into the finals. And then we go into our last semifinal match. It's Ron Simmons versus Vader. I thought it was ironic when I started putting this bracket together, that it came down to Simmons and Vader, because it was Vader that Simmons defeated to become WCW World Heavyweight Champion. And, I think that, once again, it was something that had already been seen before, but I think Vader's dominance gets ended at the hands of Ron Simmons' run in history. So Ron Simmons makes it into our finals, and that brings up a very, very intriguing matchup of Sting versus Ron Simmons. Now, we talked about Sting's longevity. Sting was the franchise for WCW. Sting was the man. And I think that what you see with Sting is it would be his longevity. It's Sting, putting WCW on his back. But you're also going to see that from Ron Simmons, because Ron Simmons isn't only putting a whole company on his back. Ron Simmons has a whole race on his back. Ron Simmons is representing every African American that came before him, every African American that would come after him. He's representing all the kids in the inner cities. He's representing all the people that were held back because of the color of their skin. And he goes into a match and he becomes the first ever African American World Heavyweight Champion. So, in our match with Sting and Ron Simmons, I'm going to do a little different here. I'm going to give you what I would do for this match. This would be my booking of the tournament final. So I want to throw that in there just a little bit. I booked this as a baby match. Both men are baby faces coming into this, because although he had a really good run with Doom in WCW, Ron Simmons was mainly a baby face, and was a very good baby face at that. Of course, we know Sting spent the majority of his career as a baby face post '87, after he split up with the Hot Stuff International, with him and Steiner as a tag team, Rick Steiner. But so we booked this baby. I'm not going to give them a long time, because I don't think they need a long time to tell this story. Because Sting, while he has the quickness, he also has the power. Ron Simmons is going to be your power-based babyface. And I don't have them going in doing a typical babyface match, though. It's not going to be trying to switch hold for hold and catch as catch can and amateur style. No, they're going to go in and do the things they do best. Sting's going to hit, quick. He's going to hit hard. Sting's going to try to do everything that he can to take Ron Simmons out. But I think I go back to revisit some of history, and I have Simmons take out Sting's knee. Ron Simmons is able to overpower Sting. The finish of the match would see Sting in a comeback. Fight. Have Sting shoot Simmons into the corner. He goes for the Stinger splash. He hits it, but Simmons holds on, turns Sting around, does the running power slam out of the corner, and that's your match right there. 1, 2, 3. Ron Simmons becomes the ultimate NWA/WCW World Heavyweight Champion. Now, I know there's people who are probably going to disagree with my point of view. They're going to say, oh, you're only doing this because he was the first African American World Heavyweight Champion. And while you may be right, that is one of my arguments, is that he was the first ever African American World Heavyweight Champion. I don't know if people realize the significance of that. I don't think people fully grasp what happened. I mean, he surpassed guys that could have easily had a good run with the belt. The Hacksaw Butch Reeds, which ironically was his tag team partner at one point. So there you have it. We had a little video difficulty there. Going to go ahead and get a little bit more of what I was saying. Some of the people that he surpassed, the Junkyard Dog, Hacksaw Butch Reed, guys that could have easily had a good run with the championship. So Ron Simmons, your ultimate NWA/WCW World Heavyweight Champion. I'm interested to know what you people think. I put a lot of thought into it. Hopefully you will too. Hopefully you give it a shot. Don't forget, you can catch me across all platforms of social media at JJ The Body. That is Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at JJ The Body. You can hit me up anywhere there, anytime you want. So I want to hear your thoughts. You can also, don't forget, on the second and fourth Saturdays of every month, you can find me in Cornelia, Georgia at the Landmark Arena for Anarchy Wrestling. That's the second and fourth Saturdays. You can also find Anarchy Wrestling on Facebook. You can also find them on Twitter at Anarchy Landmark to keep up, with the comings and goings there. If you've never been to the Landmark Arena, formerly known as the NWA Arena or the Church of Southern Wrestling, I definitely suggest you come out there. It's the second and fourth Saturday, so you have plenty of time to plan. You can make a trip down there. You will not regret coming. You can also check me out on powerbomb.tv for Anarchy Wrestling. I am doing color commentary with my old friend Dan the Dragon Wilson, who is on play-by-play, so a lot of exciting stuff going on there. Of course, you can always see me here on the ECS network for On the Road with JJ. And also, don't forget, coming up on July the 29th, live event, live streaming here on the ECS network. It's going to be all the hosts are going to do some kind of variety drop in all day long. You'll get to pick what we talk about. It's going to be for a good cause here, so there'll be more details of that coming on. No doubt that Greg Hunter / Mike Brown, whatever you want to call him, depends on what show he's on. You're going to be able to see him doing all that. So, hey, I thank you guys so much for watching. I know I ran a little bit long. This was like 2 episodes of On the Road in one, but hopefully you guys enjoyed. Hopefully you guys watched, and hopefully I'll hear some feedback on you. And until next time, it's John the Body Johnson.